Arizona Territory, 1887. The setting sun painted the vast landscape in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the arid terrain of the C-Bar W Ranch. Cora Williams stood on the wide veranda of her sprawling hacienda, surveying her domain with eyes as sharp as the edge of a well-honed knife. At 32, she commanded the largest cattle empire in the Arizona Territory, a fact that inspired both respect and resentment among her neighbors. "The herd from the north pasture is moving in, ma'am," announced Clayton Reynolds, her foreman of 5 years. "Water's running low in the creek beds, but we should make it through if the monsoons come early." Cora nodded, her face betraying nothing of the concern that gnawed at her. Drought was a constant threat, but she had weathered worse. "And the Silver Queen mine? Production's up 15% since we installed the new pumps. You were right about that investment." "I usually am," she replied, "not from pride, but from simple acknowledgement of fact. Being wrong in this land cost lives and fortunes. She'd lost enough of both." Clayton hesitated, shifting his weight from one dusty boot to the other. "There's something else, Mrs. Williams." Cora turned to face him fully, noting the tension in his weathered face. "Go on." "Word from Tucson. There's been another raid. Stagecoach carrying payroll for the Southern Pacific. 3 men dead, money gone." He lowered his voice. "They're saying it was Nahale's band." The name struck her like a physical blow, though nothing in her expression changed. 5 years had passed since she'd heard it spoken aloud, though not a day went by when it didn't echo in her thoughts. "The Apache ghost," Clayton continued, using the name white settlers had given to the elusive raider. "Army's doubled the bounty on his head. $5,000 now." "Thank you, Clayton. Have Josiah ready the carriage for tomorrow. I'll be going into Tucson for the Cattlemen's Association meeting." "Yes, ma'am. Will you be needing an escort? With these raids, just Josiah and his shotgun will suffice." Her tone made it clear the matter was settled. After Clayton departed, Cora allowed herself to sit in one of the hand-carved rocking chairs that lined the veranda. Only then, in solitude, did she permit herself to close her eyes, allowing the memories she'd suppressed to surface. Nahale. The name meant he who walks silently in Apache. She had called him that once, in a whisper, during a moment that should never have happened between a white woman and an Apache man. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Cora opened her eyes, straightening her spine. Sentiment was a luxury she could ill afford. Her husband Charles had been dead for 6 years now, leaving her with an empire to protect and expand. His death had transformed her from a genteel Eastern transplant into a formidable businesswoman who commanded respect in a man's world. What few knew was that Charles Williams had been more business partner than husband, their marriage a cordial arrangement beneficial to both. His consumption had been a slow, wasting death, and she had nursed him faithfully, earning his trust and eventually his entire fortune. The gossips who suggested she'd married for money weren't entirely wrong, but they missed the nuance of mutual respect that had defined their relationship. "Mrs. Williams?" A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor, her Mexican housekeeper, stood at the door. "Dinner is ready, and this came for you." She extended a telegram on a small silver tray. Cora took the paper, unfolding it with steady hands. "Urgent, Apache raid on silver shipment. Expected federal marshals request your presence at a security meeting tomorrow, 2 Command p.m. Tucson Territorial Offices respectfully, Judge Hollister." She carefully refolded the telegram. "Thank you, Elena. Please have Josiah prepare for an early departure. We'll leave at first light." That night, Cora sat at her writing desk, ledgers open before her. The numbers told a story of prosperity, hard won through calculation and sacrifice. Yet her mind kept straying to another time, 5 years earlier, when she had found herself stranded with a broken wagon wheel on the edge of Apache territory. She had been alone, Charles bedridden at home, when a tall figure emerged from the shimmering heat of the desert. Not wearing the U.S. Army Scout uniform she might have expected, but traditional Apache garments. She had reached for her hidden derringer when he spoke in perfect educated English. "That small gun won't help you much out here, Mrs. Williams." He knew her name, and somehow, despite everything she'd been taught to fear, she hadn't felt afraid. Cora closed the ledger with a decisive snap. That memory belonged to another life, another woman. Tomorrow she would meet with the marshals, strengthen her security, and protect what was hers. If Nahale had indeed returned to this territory, he would find her changed, hardened by years of fighting for her place in this unforgiving land. She extinguished the lamp and moved to the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of land that was hers by law and determination. The moon cast silver light across the desert, transforming it into an otherworldly landscape. Somewhere out there, perhaps, was a man she had once known in a moment outside of time, now an outlaw, a raider, a ghost. Just another enemy to overcome, she whispered to herself, drawing the curtains closed. The stagecoach rattled over the rough terrain, throwing dust in its wake as it made its way through the narrow canyon that marked the halfway point between Cora's ranch and Tucson. Inside, Cora reviewed her notes for the Cattlemen's Association meeting, dressed impeccably in a tailored traveling suit of deep burgundy, her chestnut hair swept up beneath a modest hat. Beside her sat Josiah, a former slave from Georgia who had followed Charles West after the war, serving now as her driver and sometimes bodyguard. His weathered hands rested on a shotgun, eyes constantly scanning the passing landscape. "Canyons always make me nervous, Miss Cora," he said quietly. "Too many places for ambush." "That's why we have our friend up top," Cora replied, referring to the armed guard riding shotgun with the driver. Still, she felt a prickle of unease. This particular stretch of road had seen 3 raids in as many months. The stagecoach suddenly lurched to a halt, nearly throwing Cora from her seat. "What in heaven's name?" she began, but Josiah's raised hand silenced her. Muffled shouts came from above, followed by a single gunshot. Then silence. "Get behind me, Miss Cora," Josiah whispered, raising his shotgun toward the door. The stagecoach door was wrenched open. Sunlight flooded the dim interior, momentarily blinding Cora. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring down the barrel of a rifle held by a man whose face was concealed behind a bandana. Behind him stood 2 others, similarly masked. "Step out, slow and easy," the first man ordered, his accent marking him as neither white nor Mexican. Josiah's shotgun didn't waver. "You best ride on, mister. Ain't nothing here worth dying for." "The woman, Cora Williams, she comes with us." The man's dark eyes shifted to Cora. "No one needs to die today, old man." "I'm afraid I can't allow that," Josiah replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. Cora placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's all right, Josiah. Lower your weapon." "Miss Cora, do as I say." Her voice was calm but firm. "These men could have killed us already if that was their intention." Reluctantly, Josiah lowered the shotgun. "Wise choice," said the masked man, stepping back to allow Cora to exit. As she emerged from the stagecoach, dignity intact despite the circumstances, Cora surveyed the scene. The driver and guard were alive, disarmed and bound. 4 riders on horseback surrounded the stagecoach, all masked, all armed. "If it's money you want," she began. "It's not," interrupted the leader. He gestured to one of his men, who brought forward a horse. "You'll ride with us, Mrs. Williams." "And if I refuse?" The man's eyes crinkled slightly, suggesting a smile behind the bandana. "You won't." Something in his voice, the particular way he pronounced her name, sent a shock of recognition through her. Before she could process it, he had moved closer, speaking so only she could hear. "For old time's sake, Cora, come peacefully. I have no wish to harm your people." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Those eyes, she knew them, had dreamed of them on lonely nights when the vastness of her empire felt like a prison. "Nahale," she whispered. His only response was to offer his hand, helping her mount the horse. As they prepared to ride away, Cora called back to Josiah, "Tell Judge Hollister I've been delayed, and Josiah, no heroics." The old man nodded grimly, understanding the message behind her words. "Don't follow, don't risk lives unnecessarily." As the band of riders moved swiftly away from the stagecoach, taking a hidden trail into the rugged mountains, Cora maintained her composure. Years of negotiating with hard men had taught her to hide fear and calculate advantages. Right now she had precious few, except one. The man who had taken her captive was not a stranger, but a ghost from her past. A man who had once saved her life, a man she had never expected to see again, and a man who, if the stories were true, had become one of the most wanted outlaws in the Arizona Territory. As the dust settled behind them, the band of riders carrying Cora Williams deeper into Apache territory left civilization further behind with each passing mile. The narrow mountain trails they followed would be invisible to untrained eyes, paths known only to those who had called this harsh land home for generations. The journey into the mountains was arduous, following trails that appeared non-existent to untrained eyes. Cora rode in silence, her mind calculating distances and landmarks while assessing her captors. The four men moved with the efficiency of those accustomed to evading pursuit, communicating in a mixture of Apache and occasional English. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden canyon, the entrance obscured by a natural formation of boulders. Inside, a small encampment of perhaps 15 people came into view, men, women, and even a few children. Not merely bandits, Cora realized, but families. Nahale dismounted first, then helped Cora down with hands that were impersonal yet somehow familiar. He still hadn't spoken directly to her since that whispered exchange at the stagecoach. "You'll stay here," he said finally, gesturing toward a small wickiup, a traditional Apache dwelling covered with brush and canvas. "You won't be harmed." "How reassuring," Cora replied, meeting his gaze directly. "And how long do you intend to keep me as your prisoner, Nahale? Or should I call you the Apache ghost now?" A flicker of something, regret, amusement, crossed his eyes, the only part of his face visible beneath the bandana. With a quick motion, he pulled it down, revealing features both familiar and changed. At 34, Nahale's face had hardened, new scars telling stories of battles survived, but the sharp intelligence in his obsidian eyes remained unchanged. "Call me what you wish," he replied, his voice lower than she remembered. "You'll be released when it's safe to do so." "Safe for whom?" "You're interfering with federal business. The marshals are expecting me." "I know." He motioned for a young Apache woman to approach. "Nasha will see to your needs. I suggest you rest. We'll speak later." With that abrupt dismissal, he turned and walked away, leaving Cora with the young woman who gestured respectfully toward the wickiup. Inside the modest shelter, Cora found clean blankets laid over pine boughs, a small water skin and some dried meat. Basic but adequate. She sat, gathering her thoughts, as Nasha departed with a shy nod. 5 years. 5 years since that chance encounter on the edge of Apache territory. 5 years since 3 days that had changed her understanding of herself and the world. The memories flooded back unbidden. Her broken wagon wheel, Nahale appearing like a mirage in the desert heat. His unexpected assistance, his surprising education, the result, she would learn, of missionary schooling before he returned to his people. The sudden summer storm that forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned mining shack. 3 days of conversation that traversed worlds. His life as the son of a chief who had studied the white man's ways to better protect his people. Her history as a banker's daughter who had married strategically and found herself mistress of a cattle empire in a land she barely understood. 3 days of gradual, impossible connection across the chasm of 2 colliding worlds. And on the 3rd night, when the boundaries between them had somehow dissolved in the intimacy of shared stories and mutual respect, a single kiss, tentative, forbidden, electric with possibility. A kiss interrupted by the arrival of an army patrol, triggering their hasty separation, and a promise, made in desperate whispers, to meet again. A promise never kept. Cora had returned to her ailing husband and her growing responsibilities. Nahale had disappeared as the army intensified its campaign against the remaining free Apache bands. Months later, she had heard rumors of his death in a skirmish. She had mourned privately, burying that brief connection deep within her heart as she transformed herself into the formidable Mrs. Williams, a woman who commanded respect throughout the territory. And now, here he was, alive, changed, a leader of what appeared to be refugees as much as raiders. The flap of the wickiup opened, startling her from her reverie. Nahale entered carrying a tin cup of coffee which he offered without ceremony. "I imagine you have questions," he said, settling across from her. Cora accepted the coffee, buying time to compose herself. "Several, beginning with why you've abducted the territory's largest taxpayer and employer." A hint of the smile she remembered briefly softened his features. "Still direct. That hasn't changed." "Answer the question, Nahale." He nodded, respect evident in his posture. "The marshal's meeting you were summoned to, it's a trap. Not set by them, but by Colonel Hargrove of Fort Buchanan. He's been pursuing my people for months, frustrated by our activities. You mean your raids on payroll shipments and stagecoaches? I mean our efforts to feed our people who are starving on the reservations while government agents steal the supplies meant for them. His voice remained calm, but intensity burned in his eyes. Hargrove learned of your summons. He planned to use you as bait, knowing I've targeted your silver shipments before. Cora studied him, weighing his words against what she knew of the military commander. Colonel Hargrove's reputation for ruthlessness in dealing with Apache troubles was well established. Still, why would he think you'd risk capturing me? Our acquaintance was brief and years ago. I doubt anyone even knows of it. Nahale held her gaze. Because 2 months ago, one of your foremen caught 2 of my men retrieving cached supplies on the northern edge of your property. You ordered them released instead of handed to the army. Cora's cup paused halfway to her lips. Those were your men. They told me of a tall woman with eyes like winter rain who said, "Tell your leader this is the only mercy I offer. Next time I'll hang thieves myself." Despite herself, Cora felt heat rise to her cheeks. I didn't know they were yours. Didn't you? His question hung between them, challenging. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from outside. Nahale was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the pistol at his hip. A young Apache man burst through the opening. "Riders approaching from the south," he reported in his native tongue, which Cora understood just enough to comprehend. "How many?" Nahale demanded, already moving. "At least 12. Army by the look of them." Nahale turned to Cora, his expression hardening. "It seems Hargrove is more resourceful than I anticipated. Your man Josiah must have led them here." "Josiah would never," Cora began, then stopped. "Of course. The guard on the stagecoach. He must have been one of Hargrove's men." Nahale nodded grimly. "We need to move. Now." He extended his hand to her. "Unless you prefer to greet the colonel and explain your presence in an Apache camp." The implication was clear. Association with Apache renegades would destroy everything she had built, regardless of the circumstances. Cora took his hand, rising with the dignity that had become her armor. "What about your people?" Something flickered in Nahale's eyes, surprise at her concern, perhaps. "They have a route prepared. We've survived worse." Outside, the camp was already in efficient motion, people gathering only essential items, dismantling shelters. Children were being led toward a narrow path at the far end of the canyon. Nahale guided Cora to where 2 horses stood ready. "Can you still ride astride?" he asked, the question carrying echoes of another time when she had surprised him with her horsemanship. "Better than most men in the territory," she replied, gathering her skirts to mount without assistance. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That I remember." They rode hard, taking a different trail from the fleeing families, climbing higher into the mountains where the scattered pine provided better cover. Behind them, faintly, came the sound of pursuit. "They're persistent," Cora observed as they paused briefly to rest the horses on a rocky outcropping. "Hargrove must want you badly." "Not just me." Nahale scanned the horizon, eyes narrowed. "There's a bounty on any Apache man found off the reservation. Dead or alive, with preference for the former." The bitterness in his voice struck Cora. "Is that why you turned to raiding? Revenge?" His gaze snapped to hers, intensity burning in his dark eyes. "Survival, Cora. When they forced us onto the reservation at San Carlos, it was a death sentence. Disease, starvation, corruption. I watched children waste away while government agents sold the food meant for them." He turned away, focusing again on their back trail. "I lead raids on payroll shipments and supply wagons because that money feeds my people. Every dollar goes to buy medicine, food, blankets, smuggled back to the reservation by those of us who can still fight." The man before her was not the thoughtful, philosophical person she had met 5 years ago. That man had believed change was possible through understanding. This one had learned otherwise. "And your education? Your plans to be a bridge between our worlds?" she asked softly. Pain flashed across his features. "That world doesn't want bridges, Cora. It wants submission or extinction." He checked his rifle, movements precise and practiced. "We should move. There's a place 2 miles north where we can shelter for the night." As they prepared to ride again, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree near Nahale's head. Instantly, he pulled Cora from her horse, both of them taking cover behind a large boulder as more shots followed. "At least 3 shooters," he assessed calmly, returning fire with careful precision. Left ridge, about 200 yards. Cora reached for the derringer hidden in her boot, a precaution she'd maintained since her early days in the territory. 4 bullets won't help much, she acknowledged, echoing his words from their first meeting. Nahale glanced at her, surprise and something like approval in his eyes. Better than none. He handed her his revolver. You remember how to use this? Point and squeeze, she replied, checking the cylinder. I've had practice since we last met. A small nod acknowledged this evolution in her character. Cover the left approach. I'll work around to flank them. Wait. Cora caught his arm. You're risking your life for a woman who represents everything your people have lost. Why? For a moment, the gunfire and danger seemed to recede as Nahale looked at her with an intensity that transported her back 5 years. You know why, Cora Williams. Before she could respond, he was gone, moving with the silent efficiency that had earned him his name and reputation. Left alone, Cora steadied her breathing, focusing on the approach Nahale had indicated. When a shadow moved among the rocks, she fired twice, driving the would-be attacker back to cover. Minutes stretched like hours. Then suddenly shots erupted from the far side of the ridge, followed by shouts of confusion. Nahale had successfully flanked their pursuers. The firefight ended as abruptly as it had begun. Silence fell, broken only by the wind through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. Cora waited, tense, revolver ready. Finally, Nahale reappeared, a fresh cut bleeding on his forearm, but otherwise unharmed. Army scouts, he reported. Advance party. We need to move before the main force arrives. You killed them? Cora asked, her voice steady. No, wounded one tied them all. They'll be found. His eyes met hers. Does that surprise you? 5 years ago it wouldn't have. Now, she handed back his revolver. Now I'm not sure what to expect from the Apache ghost. Something in his expression softened momentarily. I'm still Nahale, just with fewer illusions. He gestured toward the horses, which had remarkably stayed nearby despite the gunfire. We have a long ride ahead. As they mounted and continued their journey deeper into the mountains, Cora felt the familiar walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. This man, this outlaw, this enemy of the world she had mastered, he was still the only person who had ever seen past her carefully constructed facade. And despite everything that logic and society dictated, despite the empire she had built and the reputation she maintained, part of her welcomed the dangerous reawakening of feelings she had thought long buried beneath the dust of the Arizona desert. Night fell quickly in the mountains, the temperature dropping sharply as darkness enveloped the landscape. Nahale led them to a small cave hidden behind a stand of juniper trees, the entrance barely visible even from a few yards away. We'll be safe here, he said, helping Cora dismount. The army won't continue searching at night, not in this terrain. Inside, the cave opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber. Nahale moved with the familiarity of someone who had used this shelter before, quickly building a small fire in a stone ring at the center. The flames cast flickering shadows across the walls, revealing supply caches carefully stored in natural niches, ammunition, dried food, blankets. One of your hideouts, Cora observed, removing her hat and loosening her hair from its tight arrangement. The relief was immediate, easing the tension headache that had been building since the ambush. Nahale nodded, tending to the horses before joining her by the fire. One of many. The mountains remember the Apache even when others wish to forget us. He unwrapped a package of jerky and offered her a piece, along with a canteen of water. They ate in silence for a time, the weight of their shared past and complicated present hanging between them. Finally, Cora spoke. You said I'd be released when it was safe. When might that be? 2 days? Perhaps 3. Once we're certain Hargrove's men have withdrawn. Nahale studied her across the fire. Your ranch manager, the former slave, he'll manage in your absence? Josiah can handle matters for a week if necessary, Cora replied, surprised by his knowledge of her household. How you've been watching my operation. I make it my business to know the powerful forces in this territory. A hint of his old wry humor surfaced. Even those who once shared coffee with me in a mining shack during a thunderstorm. The reference to their past broke something loose in Cora. I thought you were dead, she said quietly. After the army campaign against the last free bands, there were reports. Exaggerated, Nahale replied, though not without cost. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a puckered scar on his upper arm. A parting gift from the 6th Cavalry before I escaped into Mexico. Mexico, Cora repeated. Is that where you've been all this time? He shook his head. For a while. Then the reservation, trying to work within their system. His expression darkened. I watched my cousin die of fever because the Indian agent sold the medicine meant for our people. I saw children starve while surrounded by cattle grazing on land that was once ours. The passion in his voice was controlled but unmistakable. This was the core of what had transformed him from the thoughtful man she had known into the resistance leader he had become. So you decided to take matters into your own hands, Cora said, not a question, but an acknowledgement. I decided to survive, to help my people survive. Nahale met her gaze directly. Judge me if you wish, Cora Williams. You with your thousands of acres and silver mines, your empire built on land where my ancestors hunted for generations. The accusation stung, but Cora didn't flinch. I don't deny the history, Nahale, but I've built what I have through hard work and fair dealing. Fair? His laugh held no humor. Was it fair when the treaties were broken one by one? When our hunting grounds became your grazing lands? When our water sources were diverted for your cattle? Cora felt heat rise to her face. I didn't make those decisions. I wasn't even in this territory when most of that happened. Yet you benefit from them every day. Nahale's voice was quiet but relentless. Every acre you own, every silver dollar you count, all of it rests on a foundation of broken promises and stolen land. They stared at each other across the fire, the comfortable rapport of their first meeting now strained by the harsh realities that separated them. Cora was the first to look away. Perhaps you're right, she admitted, surprising both of them with her candor. But what would you have me do? Abandon everything I've built? Give up the security I've fought for? Nahale studied her for a long moment. No, he said finally. I don't expect that. I've learned not to expect the impossible. The resignation in his voice affected Cora more deeply than his anger had. She remembered the idealistic man who had once spoken of bridging worlds, of finding a path where both peoples could thrive. What happened to you, Nahale? She asked softly. The man I met 5 years ago believed change was possible. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. That man watched his sister die on the reservation because the promised doctor never came. He buried his nephew, barely 6 years old, after a cavalry raid on families trying to escape the sickness at San Carlos. His eyes, when they met hers again, contained both grief and resolve. That man learned that words and hopes don't feed hungry children or stop bullets. Cora felt the weight of his losses, understanding how they had forged this harder version of the man she had briefly known. I'm sorry, she said simply. Your sympathy changes nothing. Yet his tone had softened slightly. No, she agreed, but understanding might. They fell silent again, each lost in private thoughts as the fire burned low. Eventually, Nahale rose to add more wood, the firelight playing across the planes of his face, highlighting the new lines that spoke of years of struggle. You've changed too, Cora Williams, he observed, settling back down. The woman I met was still finding her place in this land. You move now like someone who knows exactly who she is and what she wants. Cora considered this assessment. Necessity, she replied. After Charles died, I had to become harder, more certain. A woman alone in the cattle business isn't afforded the luxury of doubt or weakness. Your husband. Nahale nodded. I heard of his passing. Consumption, they said. You heard correctly. Cora's hand moved unconsciously to the simple gold band she still wore. Not from lingering attachment, but as armor against unwanted suitors and those who questioned her right to manage her own affairs. He was a good man in his way. Our marriage was an arrangement beneficial to both. Nahale's eyebrow raised slightly. Not a love match, then. Few marriages are, in my experience. Cora met his gaze steadily. Charles needed a capable partner and heir. I needed freedom from my father's plans for me, and the opportunity to build something of my own. We respected each other. That was enough. And after? There have been no suitors for the richest widow in the territory? A hint of his former teasing tone emerged. Cora's laugh was short but genuine. More than I care to count. Ranchers, bankers, even a judge or two, all eager to help me manage what Charles left me. Which was considerable from what I hear. It was a start, she corrected. What exists now I built. Pride colored her voice, earned through years of calculated risks and relentless work. The original ranch was 10,000 acres. Now the C-Bar W spans nearly 50,000, with 3 working silver mines and the largest breeding stock operation in the territory. Nahale studied her with renewed interest. Impressive, though I imagine not everyone appreciates a woman wielding such power. Their appreciation is irrelevant to me, Cora replied with a shrug. Their respect, however, is essential, and respect I've found comes from strength and success, a philosophy we share, it seems. Nahale offered her a blanket from his supplies. You should rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Cora accepted the blanket, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. As she arranged a sleeping space near the fire, a question that had been lingering in her mind finally found voice. The children in your camp, she said. Are any of them yours? Nahale looked up from checking his rifle, surprise evident in his expression. No, he answered after a moment. There has been no wife, no children. The unspoken question hung between them. Why not? But neither seemed prepared to pursue it further. Good night, Nahale, Cora said instead, turning toward the fire. Rest well, Cora Williams, he replied, his voice carrying echoes of a gentleness she had almost forgotten. Dawn broke with the distant sound of thundering hooves. Nahale was instantly alert, moving to the cave entrance with his rifle ready. Cora joined him, having slept in her clothes and boots out of practicality. Cavalry patrol, he reported grimly. At least 20 riders moving along the valley floor. Cora peered around him, spotting the dust cloud rising in the morning light. They're heading northwest, away from us. For now. Nahale's expression remained vigilant. They'll establish a search pattern, divide into smaller units. Hargrove is thorough, if nothing else. What's your plan? Cora asked, already moving to gather her things. North, deeper into the mountains, then east toward the reservation border. He began efficiently breaking camp, erasing all signs of their presence. I have contacts there who can get word to your ranch that you're safe. Cora paused in rolling her blanket. And then? Then you return to your empire, and I return to mine. His tone was matter-of-fact, but something in his eyes belied the simplicity of his words. Your empire of outlaws and refugees, she observed, not unkindly. We prefer freedom fighters, he replied with a flash of the dry humor she remembered. They prepared the horses in companionable silence, the tension of the previous night's conversation giving way to the pragmatic focus of survival. As Nahale helped her mount, his hands lingered briefly at her waist, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the morning chill. Their journey resumed, following game trails so faint that Cora would have missed them entirely without Nahale's guidance. By midday they had climbed to a ridge that offered a spectacular view of the territory spreading below them, mountains giving way to foothills, then the vast expanse of rangeland that included her property. For your domain, Nahale said, following her gaze. It looks different from up here, smaller. Yet large enough to attract enemies, Cora replied. Not just you and your raiders. There are cattle barons from Texas moving in, eyeing my water rights, mining corporations that would take the Silver Queen if they could. Nahale studied her with new understanding. You fight your own war of survival. Different stakes, perhaps, but yes. She met his gaze. We're not so different as you might think, Nahale. We both protect what's ours with whatever means necessary. Before he could respond, a shot cracked through the air, the bullet striking rock near Nahale's horse. The animal reared in panic as more shots followed. Ambush! Nahale shouted, already dismounting and pulling Cora from her saddle. They scrambled for cover behind a fallen log as bullets splintered bark around them. 5, maybe 6 shooters, Nahale assessed, returning fire with controlled precision. Not soldiers, bounty hunters by the look of them. Cora drew her derringer, searching for targets. They must have been tracking us since the cave. A bullet grazed Nahale's shoulder, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. He barely flinched, continuing to fire with deadly accuracy. One of the attackers fell with a cry, tumbling down the rocky slope. We need to move, he said, checking his ammunition. They're trying to flank us from the east. Cora nodded, her mind racing through options. The ravine to our right, if we can reach it. Too exposed, Nahale cut her off. They'd have clear shots at us all the way down. Cora's eyes narrowed as she surveyed their situation. Years of managing a ranch in hostile territory had honed her tactical thinking. The horses are gone, she observed. But if we create a diversion on the western approach, we might slip down through those pines to the north. Nahale glanced at her with newfound respect. What kind of diversion? In answer, Cora removed a small silver flask from her boot, a gift from a Texas cattle baron with matrimonial aspirations. Whiskey, she explained, and your bandana. Understanding dawned in Nahale's eyes. He quickly tore a strip from his bandana, which Cora soaked in whiskey before stuffing it into the mouth of the flask, leaving a tail hanging out. On my count, she said, removing a match from a waterproof case in her pocket. 1, 2, 3. She struck the match, lit the whiskey-soaked cloth, and hurled the improvised explosive toward a cluster of dry brush on the western slope. Nahale provided covering fire as the flask shattered, igniting the brush in a sudden blaze that quickly spread, creating a wall of smoke and flame. Shouts of alarm rose from their attackers as Cora and Nahale used the distraction to dash toward the northern tree line, keeping low and moving fast. Bullets still followed them, but the shooter's aim was compromised by the smoke and confusion. They reached the cover of the pines, pressing deeper into the forest as the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Only when they had put significant distance between themselves and the ambush site did they pause to catch their breath. That, Nahale said between deep breaths, was not something they taught at the mission school. Cora allowed herself a small smile. Nor at Miss Porter's school for young ladies. She gestured to his bleeding shoulder. We need to tend to that. Later, he insisted. We're still too exposed. His eyes scanned their surroundings. There's a place about 2 miles from here, a hidden valley with a spring. We can rest there. The journey continued on foot, more arduous without horses, but safer in the dense forest, where they could move without creating dust or obvious trails. Nahale set a punishing pace despite his injury, and Cora matched it without complaint, her riding boots proving surprisingly practical for the rocky terrain. By late afternoon they reached the promised valley, a small verdant oasis nestled between stark cliffs, fed by a clear spring that trickled down moss-covered rocks to form a shallow pool. It's beautiful, Cora said softly, taking in the unexpected sanctuary. An old Apache hiding place, Nahale explained, kneeling beside the spring to drink and splash water on his face. Not many outsiders know of it. Yet you bring me here, she observed, joining him at the water's edge. He met her gaze, something unreadable in his dark eyes. You're not an outsider, Cora. Not anymore. The simple statement carried a weight that settled between them, acknowledging the unique position they occupied in each other's lives. Neither friend nor enemy, but something indefinable that transcended the boundaries separating their worlds. Cora broke the moment by gesturing to his wound. Let me see your shoulder. After a brief hesitation, Nahale nodded, removing his shirt to reveal the graze across his upper shoulder. Painful, but not serious. As Cora cleaned the wound with water from the spring, she couldn't help but notice the map of scars across his torso, each telling its own story of survival. The bounty hunters, she said as she worked. They were after you, not me. The Apache ghost is worth $5,000, Nahale confirmed. Dead or alive. A considerable sum, Cora observed, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bandage his shoulder. About the same as one of your prize bulls, I understand. His attempt at humor didn't quite reach his eyes. Cora's hands stilled on his shoulder. Is that what you think of me? That I value cattle over human lives? Nahale sighed, the anger of the previous night fading into something more complex. No, I've watched you long enough to know you're fair with your workers, generous even. Mexican, white, Negro, you judge by work, not birth. Yet you judge me for the land I own, she pointed out, resuming her bandaging. I judge the system that allowed it to be taken, he corrected. You are a complication. A complication, she repeated, securing the bandage with a neat knot. Is that what I am to you, Nahale? He turned to face her fully, their proximity suddenly intimate in the secluded valley. What would you prefer to be, Cora Williams? The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider in the 5 years since their paths had crossed and diverged. Before she could answer, A distant sound caught Nahale's attention. The faint jingle of tack, the muffled thud of hooves on soil. "Riders," he whispered, immediately alert. "At least 4, maybe more." They retreated to the shelter of an overhanging rock formation, watching as a group of 6 men on horseback appeared at the far end of the valley. Their civilian clothes and disparate weapons marked them as bounty hunters rather than military. "They're following our trail," Nahale observed grimly. "Persistent." $5,000 breeds persistence, Cora replied. She studied the approaching men with a calculating eye. "The one in front, I recognize him. Carson Reeves. Worked as a tracker for the army before turning bounty hunter. Dangerous man." Nahale glanced at her with surprise. "You know him?" "I make it my business to know the dangerous men in this territory," she replied, echoing his earlier words, "especially those who might threaten my interests." A plan was forming in her mind, risky, but with potential. "They don't know I'm with you," she said slowly. "They're looking for the Apache ghost, not Cora Williams." Understanding dawned in Nahale's eyes. "No," he said firmly. "Whatever you're thinking, I can distract them," Cora continued. "Buy you time to circle around, perhaps even reclaim their horses. It's too dangerous. These men respect money and power," she cut him off, "and fear those who wield both, which I do." Nahale studied her, conflict evident in his expression. "Why would you help me? I kidnapped you, disrupted your business, endangered your life." The question gave Cora pause. Why indeed? The answer was complicated, wrapped in layers of memory, regret, and something deeper that she had never allowed herself to fully acknowledge. "Because 5 years ago, you showed me a different way of seeing this land and its people," she said finally, "and because I'm not yet ready to watch you die." Before he could respond, she was moving, emerging from their hiding place with the confident stride of a woman accustomed to command. Her hair had come loose from its pins, her traveling suit was dust-covered and torn at the hem, but her bearing was unmistakably that of someone who expected, demanded, respect. "Carson Reeves," she called, her voice carrying across the valley with authority. "I believe you're trespassing on C-Bar W grazing rights." The bounty hunters reined in sharply, surprise evident in their postures as they recognized the territory's most prominent woman. Reeves recovered first, touching his hat in a gesture that fell just short of respectful. "Mrs. Williams," he drawled, "this is unexpected. We're in pursuit of the Apache ghost and his gang. Seen any sign of them?" Cora approached with measured steps, maintaining a careful distance. "I've been surveying potential new grazing land," she lied smoothly. "My horse was spooked by a mountain lion this morning. I've been on foot since." Reeves's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "All alone, ma'am? That seems unlikely for a woman of your standing." "My men are surveying the western ridge," she countered without hesitation. "We were to rendezvous here at sunset." She glanced meaningfully at the position of the sun. "They'll be arriving shortly with rifles." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, clearly weighing the bounty against the risk of confronting Cora's well-armed ranch hands, and the legal and social consequences that would follow from harming the territory's most powerful woman. "We tracked the Apache and a companion to this valley," he insisted, though with less certainty. "Then they've moved on," Cora replied dismissively, "though I would appreciate an escort back to my men, since you've interrupted my work." As she engaged the bounty hunters, Cora maintained awareness of her surroundings, noting from the corner of her eye the shadow that moved silently from rock to tree, circling behind the mounted men. Nahale was using her distraction exactly as she had intended. Reeves hesitated, clearly torn between his hunt and the unexpected complication of Cora's presence. "Perhaps we should wait for your men to arrive," he suggested, the suspicion in his voice unmistakable. "Curious timing, finding you here where we've tracked the Apache ghost." Cora maintained her composure, though her heart raced. Reeves was neither stupid nor easily intimidated. "Are you suggesting I'm consorting with outlaws, Mr. Reeves? That would be a serious accusation against someone who holds significant influence with the territorial governor." The reminder of her connections hit its mark. Reeves's expression soured, but he backed down slightly. "No accusation, Mrs. Williams. Just doing my job." "As am I," she replied coolly. "Now, about that escort." The crack of a rifle shot interrupted her, the bullet striking the ground near the bounty hunter's horses. The animals reared in panic as two more shots followed in quick succession, expertly placed to create chaos without causing injury. "Ambush!" one of the men shouted, drawing his pistol as the others scattered for cover. In the confusion, Cora dropped to the ground, rolling behind a large boulder as bullets began to fly in multiple directions. Nahale had created the perfect diversion, but now she found herself caught in the crossfire. From her position, she could see Nahale moving with deadly efficiency, using the terrain and the hunter's disorganization to his advantage. He took down one man with the butt of his rifle, another with a well-placed shot to the leg. Reeves, however, had maintained his composure, using the chaos to maneuver behind a rock formation with a clear line of sight to Nahale's position. As he raised his rifle, taking careful aim, Cora acted without hesitation. She fired her derringer, the small weapon's report almost lost amid the larger gunfire. But her aim was true. The bullet grazed Reeves's arm, spoiling his shot and forcing him to seek better cover. The momentary advantage was all Nahale needed. He moved like shadow through the twilight, appearing behind Reeves as if by magic. A brief struggle ensued before Reeves fell unconscious from a precisely delivered blow. Within minutes, the skirmish was over. Two bounty hunters lay wounded but alive, the others unconscious or fled. Nahale quickly gathered weapons and ammunition, then approached Cora's position. "That," he said quietly, "was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed." Cora rose, brushing dust from her skirt with as much dignity as she could muster. "In my experience, the two often coincide." A rare smile transformed Nahale's face, erasing years of hardship for a brief moment. "You shot Reeves." "I'm a better shot than most realize," she replied, reloading her derringer with practiced movements. "A woman alone must have certain skills." Nahale's expression grew serious again. "You saved my life, Cora Williams. That creates a debt in my culture. Consider it repayment for 5 years ago," she said, avoiding his gaze, "when you helped a stranded woman with a broken wagon wheel." He shook his head. "This was more than that, and you know it." He gestured toward the bounty hunter's horses, now gathered at the far end of the valley. "We should move before they recover or reinforcements arrive." As they mounted, Cora side-saddled this time, her torn skirt making it the more practical option. She felt a subtle shift in their dynamic. The boundaries between captive and captor, white rancher and Apache outlaw, had blurred into something far more complex and dangerous. They rode in silence as dusk settled over the mountains, each lost in private thoughts. When they finally stopped to make camp in a sheltered ravine, the practical tasks of securing horses and preparing a small, smokeless fire provided welcome distraction from the questions that hung unspoken between them. It was only after they had eaten a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits from the bounty hunter's saddlebags that Nahale finally broke the silence. "Why did you really help me today, Cora?" he asked, his voice low and intent in the gathering darkness. The truth this time. Cora stared into the embers of their small fire, gathering her thoughts. The answer she had given earlier was true but incomplete, a fragment of a more complicated reality she had rarely acknowledged even to herself. "5 years ago," she began slowly, "after we parted, I returned to my life as Mrs. Charles Williams, dutiful wife and emerging cattle baroness. I nursed my husband through his final months of consumption. I expanded our holdings. I became the woman you see today." She looked up, meeting his gaze across the fire. "But something changed during those 3 days we spent in that mining shack. Something I couldn't undo or forget." "What changed?" Nahale asked, his voice barely audible above the soft crackling of the fire. "I saw the world through different eyes," Cora replied. "I glimpsed possibilities I had never considered. A man who moved between worlds, who understood both without belonging fully to either." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "A connection I had never experienced, even in my marriage." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended, but impossible to retract. Nahale's expression remained unreadable in the flickering light. "And now? What do you see when you look at me now, Cora Williams? Not the idealistic scout from 5 years ago, but the outlaw with a price on his head." "I see a man fighting for his people's survival," she answered honestly. "A leader who risks his life to feed children he didn't father. A warrior who spares those he could kill." She met his gaze directly. "I see you, Nahale. Changed, hardened, but still the man who showed kindness to a stranded woman when he had every reason not to. The distance between them seemed to shrink as they regarded each other across the dying fire, the years and worlds that separated them momentarily suspended. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Cora asked, suddenly needing to know how he perceived the woman she had become. Nahale studied her for a long moment before answering. "I see strength that doesn't require cruelty, power wielded with purpose beyond self-interest." His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "I see the woman who haunted my thoughts for 5 years, across deserts and mountains and the borders between our worlds." The admission, so closely mirroring her own unspoken truth, left Cora momentarily speechless. In the silence that followed, Nahale rose and moved around the fire, settling beside her with a fluid grace that belied his injured shoulder. 5 years ago," he said quietly, "we were interrupted." Cora's breath caught as he reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The simple touch carried the weight of all the words unspoken between them, all the possibilities denied by circumstance and choice. "We still stand on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide," she whispered, even as she leaned imperceptibly closer. "Perhaps," Nahale agreed, his hand coming to rest against her cheek. "Or perhaps we are the bridge." When their lips finally met, it was neither tentative like their first interrupted kiss 5 years before, nor desperate with sudden passion. Instead, it carried the weight of time and separation, of choices made and paths diverged, of recognition that this moment existed outside the normal flow of their lives, a suspension of reality in which they could acknowledge what might have been. The first light of dawn found them already moving, riding side by side through a landscape transformed by the golden glow of sunrise. Neither had spoken much since waking, as if by mutual agreement to preserve the fragile memory of the night, without burdening it with words that would inevitably prove inadequate. Nahale led them eastward, following game trails and ancient Apache paths that would eventually bring them to the edge of the reservation and the border of their temporary shared existence. "There's a trading post about 10 miles ahead," he said, breaking the comfortable silence as they paused to rest the horses. "Manuel Suarez. He deals fairly with both whites and Apache. He can arrange for a message to be sent to your ranch." Cora nodded, adjusting her torn skirt over the saddle. "Will you continue your raids?" The question was asked without judgment, a simple acknowledgement of the reality they would soon return to. Nahale's expression grew distant. "Until my people have enough to eat. Until the government honors its treaties." He looked at her directly. "We both know that day may never come." "There must be another way," Cora said, not for the first time. "Legal challenges, appeals to Washington." "We've tried," Nahale interrupted gently. "Delegations to Washington return with more promises, more papers. Meanwhile, children starve and die of diseases that white doctors could easily cure." The frustration in his voice was evident, not directed at her, but at a system that had failed his people repeatedly. Cora understood his position more clearly now, having glimpsed the conditions he fought against through his eyes. "What if," she began, then hesitated, uncertain whether to voice the half-formed idea taking shape in her mind. "What?" Nahale prompted, his keen gaze studying her expression. Cora chose her words carefully. "What if there was a way to provide for your people without risking your lives in raids? A legitimate business arrangement that could channel supplies and medicine to the reservation?" Nahale's expression showed interest mixed with skepticism. "The Indian agents control what enters the reservation. Any official aid is skimmed or sold before it reaches those who need it." "Not if it came through private channels," Cora countered. "The C-W has contracts with suppliers across the territory. Arrangements could be made, deliveries diverted. You would risk your reputation, your business to help Apache savages?" The question held no bitterness, only genuine curiosity. Cora met his gaze steadily. "I would help people in need while protecting my investments. The raids on silver shipments and payrolls hurt my business, Nahale. This would be beneficial to both sides." A hint of his old smile touched his lips. The practical businesswoman emerges. "Always a negotiation with you, Cora Williams." "Life is negotiation," she replied, unashamed. "But in this case it could save lives, both Apache and white." Nahale considered her words, his expression thoughtful. "Such an arrangement would require trust. And a mediator, Suarez, Cora suggested. Your trading post contact. If he's respected by both sides, he could serve as the intermediary. The idea hung between them, fragile but promising. A potential bridge across the divide they had both acknowledged could not be crossed directly. Before Nahale could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats caused both to tense, eyes scanning the horizon. A lone rider appeared, approaching from the east at a gallop. One of yours? Cora asked, noting Nahale's relaxed posture as he recognized the rider. He nodded. Kitchi, my second-in-command. I sent him to check on the families after the army raid. The young Apache warrior reined in sharply as he reached them, his expression grave as he addressed Nahale in their native tongue. Cora understood enough to grasp the essence of his report. The families had reached safety, but a new threat had emerged. Nahale's face hardened as he listened, his jaw tight with controlled anger. When Kitchi finished, he turned to Cora, switching to English. Colonel Hargrove has taken hostages from the reservation, he explained grimly. 3 elders and 2 children. He claims they were attempting to leave without permission, but Kitchi says they were seized from their homes. Hargrove announces that unless I surrender within 3 days, they will be tried as hostile combatants. The implications were clear. Such a trial would be merely a formality before execution or imprisonment. Cora had heard stories of Hargrove's methods, his determination to break Apache resistance through increasingly brutal tactics. He can't do that, she said, though they both knew the hollowness of her protest. In this territory, military commanders often operated with near-absolute authority when dealing with Indian affairs. He already has, Nahale replied, his voice controlled but tense with urgency. I must return immediately. Kitchi says they're being held at Fort Buchanan. Cora processed this development quickly, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. This changes our plans, she said. Hargrove is using these hostages to draw you out, to force a confrontation on his terms. I'm aware of the trap, Nahale acknowledged, but I cannot abandon my people to his justice. The eldest hostage is my father's brother, a respected medicine man. The children are his grandchildren. The personal connection explained the intensity in Nahale's expression. These weren't just tribal members, but family, perhaps the only family he had left. Cora made a swift decision. I'm coming with you. Nahale stared at her in disbelief. Out of the question. This is no longer about you or your silver shipments. This is Apache business. This is territorial business, Cora countered firmly. Colonel Hargrove has exceeded his authority. As a major landowner and taxpayer, I have standing to challenge his actions. You would risk your position, your reputation for Apache hostages? Nahale's question echoed his earlier skepticism, but with a new edge of urgency. I would uphold the rule of law against military overreach, Cora replied, her expression determined. And yes, I would help prevent the execution of innocent people, including children. Kitchi watched this exchange with open curiosity, clearly surprised by the white woman's unexpected alliance. He spoke briefly to Nahale in Apache, too rapidly for Cora to follow. Nahale's response was curt but not dismissive. After a brief exchange, he turned back to Cora. Kitchi reminds me that having a powerful white ally could change the dynamics, he admitted. But this would place you in direct opposition to Hargrove, a dangerous enemy to make. I've faced dangerous men before, Cora said with the confidence of experience. And, unlike you, I can walk through the front gate of Fort Buchanan without being arrested on sight. The logic of her argument was irrefutable. After a moment's consideration, Nahale nodded reluctantly. We'll need a plan, he said. One that doesn't end with all of us hanging from Hargrove's gallows. 3 days later, as sunset painted the desert in hues of amber and gold, Cora Williams stood on the veranda of Fort Buchanan's headquarters building, watching as Colonel Hargrove's men led the Apache hostages into the parade ground. Her negotiations with the colonel had been tense but ultimately productive. As a respected businesswoman with connections to the territorial governor, she had leveraged her influence to arrange for the release of Nahale's family into her custody. You understand the terms, Mrs. Williams, Hargrove said, his voice tight with barely suppressed frustration. You assume full responsibility for these individuals. If they return to the reservation, you guarantee their compliance with all regulations. If they disappear, he let the implication hang in the air. I understand my responsibilities perfectly, Colonel, Cora replied, with the cool authority that had built her empire, "and I trust you understand that Governor Wilkins will be receiving my full report on this matter." The veiled threat had its intended effect. Hargrove's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. "The army exists to protect civilians, Mrs. Williams. I hope you don't come to regret your humanitarian impulses." As the hostages were officially transferred to her custody, Cora maintained her composure, betraying nothing of the tension that coiled within her. The elderly medicine man, Nahale's uncle, regarded her with eyes that reflected wisdom accumulated over decades of survival. The children clung to him, wary but resilient. "My wagon is waiting," Cora told them gently. "We'll depart immediately." The journey from Fort Buchanan to Suarez's trading post was conducted in tense silence, Cora constantly alert for any sign of pursuit or ambush. She had arranged for Josiah to meet them with additional guards, loyal ranch hands who would not question her decisions. The elaborate escort was partly for show, to maintain the fiction that she was indeed returning the Apache to the reservation under her supervision. In reality, a different plan had been set in motion days earlier. As night fell, they reached the trading post, where Suarez himself awaited them with news that Cora's private coach had been prepared as requested. The transfer was swift and discreet. The freed hostages moved from the wagon to the enclosed carriage, while fresh horses were hitched. "The arrangements are complete, Senora," Suarez confirmed quietly. "The supplies have been delivered as specified. Your representative at the Silver Queen has executed all transactions according to your instructions." "Thank you, Manuel," Cora replied. "Your discretion in this matter won't be forgotten." As the carriage departed, heading ostensibly toward Tucson, Cora and Josiah took a different route, circling back through terrain too rough for military patrols, but familiar to those who had spent years traversing the territory's hidden paths. Miles from the trading post, in a secluded valley known only to the Apache and a few trusted allies, Nahale waited with Kitchi and the core of his band. When Cora's party arrived with the freed hostages, the reunion was both joyous and solemn, a moment of victory tempered by the knowledge that it was but a temporary respite in a longer struggle. As the Apache celebrated the return of their elders and children, Nahale drew Cora aside, leading her to a quiet spot beneath towering cottonwoods. "You kept your word," he said simply. "Few white people have ever done so with my people." "I'm not most white people," Cora replied with a small smile. "And I had practical reasons as well as personal ones." Nahale's eyes reflected the starlight as he studied her face. "The arrangement you proposed, the supply line through Suarez, you've already begun implementing it." It wasn't a question, but Cora nodded in confirmation. "The first shipments of medicine and food are en route to the reservation as we speak. My foreman at the Silver Queen mine has created a dummy corporation to handle the transactions. On paper, everything appears perfectly legitimate: mining supplies, equipment, provisions for workers." "And the cost?" Nahale asked. "Less than what I was losing to raids," Cora replied pragmatically. "And considerably less than what I would lose if full-scale conflict erupted between settlers and Apache. Peace is good business, Nahale." His smile acknowledged the truth in her words, but also recognized the deeper motivations she left unspoken. "And Hargrove?" "Will find himself reassigned within the month," Cora said with quiet satisfaction. "The territorial governor was quite receptive to my concerns about military overreach, particularly when I mentioned the potential impact on Eastern investment if news of hostage-taking spread to financial circles in New York and Boston." Nahale shook his head in wonderment. "You've accomplished in days what we couldn't achieve in years of resistance." "Different weapons for different battles," Cora observed. "Your raids kept your people alive. My methods may help them thrive." They stood in silence for a moment, both aware that their partnership had fundamentally altered the equation in the territory, creating possibilities where before there had been only conflict. "What happens now?" Nahale asked finally, the question encompassing far more than just their business arrangement. Cora looked toward the celebration, where Apache families reunited amid the flicker of campfires, then back to the man beside her, the warrior who had become so much more than an ally. "That depends," she said softly, "on whether certain boundaries can truly be crossed." Nahale stepped closer, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Some already have been." "Society would never accept," Cora began, But Nahale gently interrupted. "I'm not asking society. I'm asking you, Cora Williams." The simplicity of his statement cut through the complexity of their situation, reducing it to its essence. Two people who had found in each other something rare and precious, something worth fighting for despite all obstacles. "There's a place," Cora said slowly, "in northern Mexico. Land I purchased years ago as an investment. Fertile valley, water rights secured, far from both army patrols and tribal conflicts." Understanding dawned in Nahale's eyes. Neutral ground. "More than that," Cora corrected. "A new beginning. The C-W ranch can continue under Josiah's management. The Silver Queen mine is profitable enough to finance our venture." "Which is?" "A trading company," Cora explained, her vision taking clearer shape as she spoke. "Legitimate business on both sides of the border, supplies moving north to the reservations, silver and cattle moving south, and at its heart, a ranch where those caught between worlds might find sanctuary." The audacity of the plan hung between them, a dream born of necessity and possibility, of business acumen and human connection, a way forward that honored both their worlds while creating something entirely new. "It won't be easy," Nahale cautioned, though hope had kindled in his eyes. "The border is no magical barrier against prejudice or danger." "Nothing worthwhile ever is easy," Cora replied. "But together, we might accomplish what neither could alone." His hand tightened around hers. "Together," he repeated, the word carrying the weight of promise. When he drew her closer, their kiss beneath the star-filled sky was no longer a forbidden moment stolen from time, but a commitment to a shared future, one they would forge with the same determination that had enabled each to survive and thrive in a harsh and unforgiving land. 6 months later, Cora stood on the veranda of a hacienda nestled in a verdant valley 3 days' ride south of the border. The main house, built of adobe and timber, blended traditional Mexican architecture with American comforts. Around it, the beginnings of a ranch took shape. Corrals, barns, outbuildings constructed by a workforce drawn from both sides of the border. The trading company, officially registered as Williams and Associates in Tucson and Mexico City, had already established itself as a reliable supplier of essential goods. Few knew that its founder now resided permanently at its southern headquarters, or that her business partner was a man once known as the Apache Ghost. Nahale emerged from the house to join her, his presence bringing the familiar warmth that had only deepened in the months they had built their new life together. Though no official ceremony had marked their union, no church or court would recognize it, they lived as husband and wife in all the ways that mattered. "The first families arrive tomorrow," he said, referring to the Apache refugees who had accepted their invitation to settle on the ranch. "Kitchi reports they crossed the border without incident. Josiah's shipment of supplies reached Hermosillo yesterday," Cora added. "Everything is proceeding as planned." As they stood together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Cora reflected on the empire she had left behind and the one she was building now. The C-W continued to thrive under Josiah's management, its profits flowing partly to support this new venture. The Silver Queen mine's production had increased, providing capital for expansion. But more valuable than any business success was the peace she had found here, with this man who had crossed impossible boundaries to stand beside her. Together, they had created something neither could have imagined alone, a sanctuary where differences were strength, where the best of both worlds could flourish. "Any regrets?" Nahale asked quietly, seeming to follow her thoughts. Cora turned to him, studying the face that had become as essential to her as breath. The hard lines of the warrior remained, but tempered now by contentment and purpose. In his eyes, she saw reflected the same certainty she felt in her heart. "Not one," she answered truthfully, "though I never imagined my life would lead here." "To exile?" he asked with a hint of his old wry humor. "To home," she corrected, leaning into his embrace as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, bright beacons in a vast borderless expanse that, like their love, recognized no boundaries and feared no frontiers. In this new empire they built together, not of land or wealth or power, but of shared vision and mutual respect. They had found what both had sought throughout their separate journeys, not merely survival, but the chance to truly live, to love without constraint, and to create a legacy that might, in its small way, help heal the wounds of a divided land. As night fell over their valley, Cora Williams and Nahale stood together on the threshold of a future neither had dared to dream possible, proof that even in a world defined by borders and boundaries, the human heart could find its way to freedom, to connection, and ultimately to home. This is a story about courage, not the kind found on battlefields, but the kind it takes to open your heart in a world built to keep it closed. Cora Williams and Nahale came from opposite sides of history, divided by blood, betrayal, and silence. Yet together, they proved that love does not recognize borders, bow to injustice, or ask permission to exist. They didn't just find each other. They built something new, a home for those who belong nowhere and everywhere. May this story remind you that true strength lies in empathy, in listening, in daring to love across every divide. And that even in the harshest lands where the wind carries sorrow and the dust remembers pain, love can take root and bloom. With gratitude, Wild West whispers, "Thank you so much for staying with us until the end." If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. From the bottom of our hearts, your support keeps us going, and it inspires us to continue crafting more stories filled with deep love, hard-won redemption, and powerful twists that echo long after the final scene. And don't go just yet. At the end of this video, you'll see a new suggested story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be swept away by more emotional, dramatic, and unforgettable storytelling. We promise you won't be disappointed.